This is important. Ender's Game is one of my favorite books. Here it is. I found it. And it was funny because when this person put this quote on Twitter today, I didn't really think it had to do with the topic that I was tweeting about, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good quote. But is Ender's Game a hard book? No, it's a science fiction book, but we read it in book club a while ago. But this quote describes how I feel about what I do. In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way they love themselves. And then in that very moment, when I love them, I destroy them. That quote is pretty apt for what it's like when you watch hardcore, like, first of all, like leftist training, woke training, and then hardcore socialist training almost every day of your life for 3 years. And it's even worse than that for me because I don't think we're ever going to beat them. You know, in Ender's Game, I don't mean to give away the plot to anyone, but it's been a movie for a while. It was a book for a long time. If you haven't read it, I promise you I'm not spoiling anything by telling you this. But in Ender's Game, they win. They defeat the enemy. They win. Okay, they win. I don't think we're ever going to win. And this is probably the hardest part of this whole thing for me, because not only do I not think we're ever not like the reason that I believe that we are never, ever, 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 ever going to beat the left and that we are on the decline into the socialist utopia. And some of us, depending on how old we are, may see it in our lifetime. The reason I don't think we're going to win is not that we couldn't win, is that people don't care. People just don't care. I just wish it was a little bit easier. I wish I could give all this up. I wish that other people would do more. I wish that people took it more seriously. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is I've been nailing down the timeline in relation to the 4 goals of the woke left. And and this was again a complete accident that it just aligned this way. But the 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever the same, right? Gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. Everything they do is for one of those goals. But those goals are also kind of sequential too. They can do tactics that meet all 4 of those goals. But those goals are sequential, right? You have to gain power before you destabilize the system, because you can't destabilize the system unless you've gained power in some way, because if you didn't have the power, you wouldn't be able to destabilize the system. You have to destabilize the system before you attack capitalism, because if you don't destabilize the system, then you don't have any problems to blame capitalism for. You can't just attack capitalism out of nowhere. There has to be a reason, right? They have to cause the problem by destabilizing the system. And then they could say, you know what the cause of this is capitalism. Capitalism is to blame for all these problems. And of course, ushering in their Marxist utopia has to come last, because they can't usher in their Marxist utopia until they overcome capitalism. So not only are the 4 goals just like they can meet one end or all 4 of those goals at the same time, but there is a sequence to these. And just like there's a sequence to them, the left is more focused sometimes on some goals rather than others. So, From the 1950s, when the Frankfurt School landed at Columbia University and started the Long March through the institutions in the 1950s, up until Barack Obama was elected president. That is a 60-year time period, 60, 50s to 2008, roughly. From the 1950s up until 2008-ish, the left was mostly focused on gaining power, that goal number one, by getting themselves into positions of institutional power within the universities and then within the K through 12 schools and then within media and journalism and all that stuff. They were getting into it was the long march through the institution, because the long march through the institution is literally about getting yourself into positions of institutional power where you have the ability to make decisions. They were doing that between 1950s and 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president. Their main goal was to gain as much power as possible. Once Barack Obama was elected president, they switched gears because they had gained their institutional power. The long march through the institutions was successful. And then once they got Barack Obama elected president, they switched gears from focusing primarily on gaining as much power as possible to destabilizing the system, because this is when we started to see problems showing up. This is why Ben Shapiro thinks all this woke shit just started in 2008. It didn't just start in 2008. It started in the 50s. But they started focusing on destabilizing the system in 2008, 2009, 2010, somewhere around, I'm going to put it as 2008, the election of Barack Obama, just because that's like a nice even number, and I think that that's actually correct. So what I think is that they are currently in the phase where they are focusing primarily on destabilizing the system by causing problems. So when do they go into the next phase of focusing primarily on attacking capitalism? When does that happen? I think that happens in 5 to 10 years. And the reason that I say that that new phase starts where they're going to go from destabilizing the system to having it completely destabilized and focusing all their attention on just fucking hammering capitalism. It's not that they aren't already attacking capitalism. They do it all the time. But I'm talking about, like, right now, they're really just mainly focused on causing problems. They're still like working. They always and perpetually will be trying to gain as much power as they can. That didn't stop, but it's just like the focal point of their energy. I think that comes in 5 to 10 years. Why do I say that? Because that is when the kids who have been experiencing woke indoctrination in every stage of their life since kindergarten, 5 to 10 years is when they graduate from college and move into the working world. And that's when I think the pain really begins. Now, here's my bigger point. From the 1950s until 2008, that was 60 years. 60 years. 60. From 2008 till, let's just say, 2030, roundabout, from 2008 to 2030, 22 years. So now the cycle, the amount of time it's taking to do things, because they did the work of gaining institutional power for 60 years. The amount of time in the second stage is 1/3 the amount of time as the first stage was. So what that means is it's going to take less time to get through the subsequent stages, is what I think. Because the first step is always the hardest in anything you do. The first step is going to take the longest. The first step is where you're troubleshooting, you're figuring it out. Once you've got that first step down, the second step is easier. So we went from a cycle of 60 years to now a cycle of, let's just call it 25 years, just to be generous, okay? You're essentially cutting your cycle in half. It's taking you half the time to go from step 2 to step 3 than it did from step 1 to step 2. So we move into the phase where they're hammering and attacking capitalism. If it takes, like, again, like roughly, if it takes half of the time to move from stage 2 to stage 3 as it did to move from stage 1 to stage 2, then doesn't it stand to reason that it might take half of the time to move from stage 3 to stage 4 as it did from stage 2 to stage 3? So now we're talking about 10 to 15 years, which means if I'm right about my timeline, and I certainly pray to God that I'm not right, because I don't think there's any stopping it right now with the way people are behaving, that puts us at the Marxist Revolution in like 2045. Is everyone comfortable with that? I'm not comfortable with that. I'm still going to be alive in 2045. I don't want to live through that shit. Do you want to live through that shit? People think it's not going to affect them, and they're wrong. It's going to affect everyone. Everyone. You know, people all the time, they're like, Carlin, thank you for all you do. And it's even more impressive that you do it because you don't have kids. Listen, man, like, I appreciate that you're thanking me for looking out about what's going on in your kid's school better than you are. But I'm fucking selfish. I'm selfish as shit. I don't want to live through this. I don't want to live through this. Do you want to live through this? Then what the fuck are we doing? And why am I the only one talking about this? So there's this movie, Knowing, that probably is one of my more, like, a movie that I really like. And it's with Nicolas Cage, and Nicolas Cage has a son, and the son starts seeing these black creatures or whatever. And basically, Nicolas Cage, because these creatures are showing up, Nicolas Cage ends up finding like a time, like the son brought home a time capsule from school, and the time capsule had this piece of paper in it that was like a secret code that it predicted all these major events that had like high death counts and tragedies. And it was in a time capsule from like 50 years before that was buried at his son's school, and his son brought it home, and Nicolas Cage starts deciphering the code off of this piece of paper and starts to figure out, oh shit, this piece of paper is predicting deaths of people that no one can, that like it couldn't, like when this was put in the ground, they couldn't have possibly known that. So what the fuck is this? And then, and I'm just gonna give away the spoiler. If you don't want to hear it, don't. But this is an older movie, and it's still a good movie. And so the code on the paper was a sequence, right? It, like, everything was happening sequentially. And then at the end of the paper, it said EE, and he's like, "What the hell does EE stand for?" Well, EE stood for everyone else, as in the end of the world. Okay? And the world did end in the movie. Basically, what happened is a solar flare came from the sun and engulfed the planet and killed everyone on the planet. I know, it's a delightful, warm-hearted, optimistic movie. But my point here is this. Is I feel like the reality that I'm in, I feel like I'm Nicolas Cage in that movie, because I can see the end of the fucking world. I can see the Marxist takeover. I can see the Marxist revolution. I have a fucking date when I think this shit is going to happen, and I think it's going to be around 2045, 2050. I can see this coming. I can lay it all out. I can show people the evidence. I can walk people through it. I do this every single, like, the reason I've got so obsessed with this is I can see the end of the fucking world. I can see it in a way that I don't think many other people are seeing it. And it's very real to me because I live in this space and I know these people. And I know what they're doing. I've got the whole fucking thing reverse engineered. I know exactly what they're doing. I know how they're doing it. I know how to predict what they're doing. And there's nothing that I can do to stop it. There's nothing that I can do. Because no matter what I do, I can't get people to care. And they care about all this stupid shit. And I'm like, the end of the world is coming. And they're like, bitch, you're crazy. I'm like, oh, well, you can think that now, but no, no, no. Like, I can see it. The end of the world is coming. Yeah, it's coming. We're going right into it. We're going at it like it's like a fucking speeding bullet and we're about to hit the fucking wall at any second. And I know you can't see it because you're not paying attention to the things I'm paying attention to, but I found the right fucking things to pay attention to. I found the levers that are making this happen. I found it completely by accident. It wasn't my intention to do this, but this is where I ended up. And I can see the end of the world, motherfuckers. And I'm beating the drum and I'm trying to warn you and I'm trying to show you and I'm trying to illustrate to you what's going on. And none of you are fucking listening because you're distracted with drag shows. And so it's just me seeing the end of the world and knowing what's coming. And I'm like, ain't shit I can do about it. And no one cares. No one cares. Jenny's getting inky with it. Thank you for the super chat. Part of the problem is influencers disagree with you, then tell their friends who are too lazy to see what's actually going on and just write you off. Yup. Let me add on to this. Influencers who are not as smart as me and not as informed as me just think I'm a crazy bitch, and then they tell their friends that I'm a crazy bitch, and then all of a sudden no one fucking listens. It's how we get into the mess we're in, too much trusting other people's perception of reality. Oh god, ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth?